can improve your fantasy football team dramatically if you just start to send some trades. And not just any trades. I'm talking about trades for running backs who are currently buy lows who are expected to have great rest of seasons right now. And in this video, we'll break down the 5 running backs that I uncovered that fit that mold and will help you win your league. And we're going to start with Ramondre Stevenson, and this one might confuse you. I get it, but he is one of the best buy lows right now. And I understand if you watch the Saturday morning game or the Sunday morning game in London this past week, you're going to be like, Ramondre Stevenson, really? Ramondre Stevenson, Sal, the guy who did this, he put up 4.5 fantasy points against Jacksonville, a poor defense. He only had 9 total touches, 18 rushing yards, 7 receiving yards, 25 total yards, and did nothing for me for the 3rd time in the past 4 weeks. Look, I get it. That's really gross, but it needs a lot more context than just that game log I showed. Because Stevenson entered the week, this is the Patriots injury report, with a foot injury. Not only did he enter the week with a foot injury, we can scroll by each day. On Wednesday, he did not practice. On Thursday, he did not practice. And then on Friday, he was able to practice, but that was kind of a fugazi practice because the team was leaving to go ahead and fly 6 to 7+ hours to London. So not only was Stevenson not 100%, not even expected to play in this game, and then he suited up, but he was also dealing with the time difference of London, which doesn't help your body heal or be ready at all. So I think this context is important because, yeah, he laid a stinker in week 7, but I think the future is actually pretty bright for Stevenson and maybe this Patriots offense. At least from a fantasy perspective. Real life, they have 1 win, they're 1-6, they look terrible, their coach might be fired in his first season, right? But from a fantasy perspective, things are looking up. And it's all because of this young 22-year-old rookie quarterback, their top 5 overall pick. They might have finally landed on a quarterback because through his first 2 starts in the NFL, this guy actually looks really good. He's completing 66% of his passes, averaging 7.4 yards per attempt, and sustaining drives on offense. And the other positive thing for Ramondre Stevenson is even with Antonio Gibson seeing more usage in games where Stevenson is limited, like this past game or a couple of games back, Gibson really hasn't been able to do anything either. And a lot of this has to do with a poor offensive line, but in general, there's really been no reason to believe that Antonio Gibson or Jermichael Hasty is going to push Ramondre Stevenson for legitimate work in this backfield. And maybe part of the reason is because you can see right here, all these numbers, these are the highest paid running backs in the NFL, the largest contracts. And if you go down here to Ramondre Stevenson and we factor by total contract value, Ramondre Stevenson is 6th on this list. Alvin Kamara, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, those are all great running backs in the NFL. Right after them is Ramondre Stevenson, got paid this offseason a restructured contract to make him the 6th highest paid running back. That incentivizes the Patriots to keep him on the field. Now, I hinted at it earlier, but yes, the run blocking unit is terrible for the Patriots right now. They're 32nd in the NFL. That's not great, but we also know that Ramondre Stevenson is a very capable and great pass-catching running back. 2 years ago, had one of the best seasons we've seen in a while for a pass-catching running back when he was attached to Mac Jones. Now he has a quarterback in Drake May who will check it down to running backs. Like, sure, Drake May is mobile. He's going to take off and run for 20 to 30 to 40 yards per game sometimes, but it's not going to be a situation where he's not going to target his running backs. We've already seen him the past couple of weeks, just like this past week with Jermichael Hasty, often late in the game, target his RBs. So I think Stevenson's an interesting buy low right now because you look at his schedule and I think there's some okay matchups in here. Matchup against the Jets at home is fine. Matchup against the Rams is awesome, but then you actually start to scroll towards these later parts of this season once you start getting towards the fantasy postseason, and that's where things start to look really appealing for Ramondre Stevenson. Look at this. Entering the fantasy postseason, home against the Colts, bottom 5 run defense. On the road against the Cardinals, bottom 5 run defense. The Bills, the worst defense in the NFL to start the fantasy postseason. That is a great spot to have Ramondre Stevenson to help you get into the postseason and then help you in the postseason in fantasy. So I view Ramondre Stevenson as a buy low, and once again, I'm going to come on these airways and tell you that yes, I think Chase Brown, after another promising usage week, is somebody you should be buying low on. And what do I mean by a promising usage week? Well, look in week 7 right here. He plays 58% of the snaps, a season high. Sees 60+% of the rush attempts, also a season high. But if you factor out his quarterback carries in that game, he actually saw 71% of the backfield carries, well above and well in front of the other RB in this backfield, Zach Moss. Now, this has been the best usage that Chase Brown has seen playing next to Zach Moss this season. It started off the year with Zach Moss the first 2 weeks looking like the clear RB1, and ever since then, Chase Brown has been trusted more in pass protection. He's been trusted more in all situations, and now he looks like the clear RB1. But this past week, you're going to see the box score wasn't all that great. Just 7.3 fantasy points in a tough matchup against Cleveland. 15 carries for 44 yards isn't great. 17 total touches in the game, though. That is encouraging. Now, this poor performance for Chase Brown, in my opinion, has opened up a buy low window. And you just look at his last 2 games, the usage has been solid. Over the past 2 games, Chase Brown has earned 60% of the backfield snaps and 67% of the backfield carries. Now, the interesting thing was in this game, you can see right here, the blue on the screen is Chase Brown and the green is Zach Moss. You actually saw Zach Moss playing on third downs. He played 8 out of 10 third downs, played the 2 snaps in the 2-minute offense, so he was operating as the passing down back, while Chase Brown up here, the blue in this big pie chart according to PFF, had 24 snaps on early downs to just 11 for Zach Moss. So it's kind of a flippening of what we saw in the preseason or our expectation. We thought maybe Chase Brown would be the pass catching back with Zach Moss being the early down grinder. But the opposite is true right now. But the positive for Chase Brown there is we know that he's a solid pass catching running back. He was in college, he was at times in his rookie year, and he could regain that usage right now this year. And if he was to do that, that's where you start to unlock some massive upside. Now, the one thing to point out about this usage that you were seeing right here, where the third downs are going to Zach Moss right here, this one on PFF, third downs, 8 Zach Moss snaps is the green, just 2 for Chase Brown is the dark blue. A lot of that has to do with pass protection as well. The team still trusts Zach Moss, it appears, more in pass protection. Doesn't mean they don't trust Chase Brown at all. He was out there for 2 snaps on third down, but that's another area that they're still trying to ease in Chase Brown. But eventually he's going to have to see usage on third down because he's just a better playmaker here. You can see currently he's top 10 in yards per carry on the season, averaging 5.3 yards per carry. And just look at what he's doing as a pass catching running back this year. He's currently top 10 between his pass receptions and also his rushes in explosive run rate according to Player Profiler. Top 10 in plays of 10 plus yards based on how many total touches he has. This is a guy who, even if he doesn't get a full workload of being the lead back everywhere, we don't really see that much anymore in fantasy. As long as he earns the role he's currently getting now, 15, 17 plus touches a game, we take that and we want to buy low on it. Because he does have some nice matchups coming up. He's going to be some tough matchups against the Ravens and Chargers after that. Sure, we really need the pass catching to come through there, but he has nice matchups at home against the Eagles' bottom 10 run defense and the Raiders, who arguably have the worst, but definitely a bottom 5 run defense in terms of yards per play allowed rushing this season. Now, a lot of the times I get questions on, yeah, but who should I trade Chase Brown for? What's a fair trade? What's a fair package? And that is a good question. And that's also why I built this tool right here, my rest of season rankings, aka the trade tool. It just shows you this is based on last week. It has been updated and will be sent out to by the time you're watching this for this week. Every single week it's updated. This is the rest of season rankings. It's the trades tool. It shows you exactly where each player is valued across all positions the rest of the season. So you would go down, you would find Chase Brown, and anybody above Chase Brown is somebody who's a worthy target or somebody to put in a trade package. Now you might be wondering, how do I get my hands on that? And you could also get your hands on the waiver wire tiers, the projections or rankings for every week, the game-by-game matchups notes, Discord access, and a whole lot more. Well, to join the 21,000 other people who currently have access to this, you can just follow the 2 simple steps in the description below to get my fantasy blueprint, and it is risk-free this season when you sign up through one of my 2 partners, either Underdog right here, which that link will take you to, or Better. And what do I mean by risk-free when you sign up through one of our 2 partners, as it states right here? Well, it's a one-time payment of $10, and if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, you get the tools all year long, every single week, sent to you every single day. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs, you get that $10 right back. Just reach out, no questions asked. So if you want to join the over 21,000 people who are currently using my blueprint, the tools that I use for all my fantasy leagues, you can scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. Those tools will help you smack around your league mates and your friends. Now, the next player you should try and trade for is Rico Gathers, who is coming out of his bye week. He had his bye in week 7 for the Dallas Cowboys, and I think he's an interesting player to target in trades because right before the bye week, Mike McCarthy went on record to say about Rico Gathers' workload, he definitely needs to touch the ball more without a doubt. And now, usually like coach speak, okay, that's fine, whatever. But Mike McCarthy said this earlier in the season about Rico Gathers, and then it came true. Before the Cowboys played in week 4 on Thursday Night Football against their rivals, the New York Giants, McCarthy said we have to get Rico Gathers the ball more. And then in that game, Rico Gathers saw 11 carries and a reception. He totaled 46 rushing yards, 15 receiving, so 61 total yards and a touchdown. It was 13 fantasy points. This might not sound like a lot, but for that game, it was his highest snap share, highest touches compared to Ezekiel Elliott, and best fantasy day and first touchdown. So McCarthy came through for us then. I think we can trust him now coming out of the bye week where they probably gave more of a role and responsibility to Rico Gathers. And very quietly, despite this Cowboys offense stinking lately, if we pull up the Player Profiler game logs here, Rico Gathers has been pretty consistent. Like, let's just look at his total yards. He's now in 5 straight games gotten you at least 55 total yards, which again isn't anything crazy, but he's in a split backfield and should now earn more usage. He's now for 3 straight games been a very viable flex option for you. A running back 22 finish with 13 fantasy points, the RB3 overall on the week in week 5 with over 19, and then in a bad matchup and a bad game by the Cowboys overall against Detroit, he still gets over 10 fantasy points for you because he's able to produce not only as a rusher, but also as a pass catcher. He's been very good in that area. In fact, here's how good he's been. He ranks 2nd in running back yards per route run this year, and he's averaging 5 yards per touch on the season. And now, since Mike McCarthy gave Rico Gathers that larger workload in week 4, according to Fantasy Life, you see in week 5, 67% of the rush attempts. Then in week 6, it's a game that gets really wonky and out of hand, and they pull the starters late, so you only see 29% of the snaps, 31% of the carries. But over the last month of the season, he's earning over 50% of the rush attempts, including a game where the starters got pulled at the beginning of the 4th quarter. And now he's coming out of his bye week into a very good schedule. I mean, this is his rest of season schedule, by the way, and look how strong this is. You get the Texans, who just gave up 20 fantasy points. This is from November on, basically around Thanksgiving. 20 fantasy points to Josh Jacobs. Great matchup against the Commanders. Great matchup against the Giants yet again, who he had his best performance or one of his best performance against. Bengals, a bottom 5 run defense. Now you're getting into the fantasy postseason. The Panthers, the worst defense as of right now in NFL history overall. A nice matchup against the Bucs, which could have a lot of points. The Eagles, and then the Commanders again. Like, there's really not his final 6 to 7 weeks a single difficult matchup for Rico Gathers, and that's why you want to be trading for him. Not not for week 8 or week 9's matchup, but for your fantasy postseason, getting to the postseason, and then while you're in those games. So trade for Rico Gathers, and then make sure you go out there and send another trade. Yet again, I'm here on these airwaves telling you to buy low on Brian Robinson because, look, the dude is just fantastic. The last time that we actually saw Brian Robinson until this past week was back in week 5, where he had just 7 carries, 18 yards in a tough matchup, but he was banged up. He didn't play the second half. His 2 touchdowns, though, got you there for almost 14 fantasy points. But again, he didn't play the second half of week 5. Then he sat out week 6 with an injury, but in week 7, he was trending to play. Questionable, but he ended up playing. And in week 7, I mean, he looked good. He had 12 carries for 71 yards and a touchdown. He was averaging 6 yards per touch against a bad Carolina Panthers defense. He had put up over 13 fantasy points, and he did this in like just a half of play because in the second half, the Commanders were up by 2 to 3 to 4 scores. They started to pull back Brian Robinson's snaps and workload, and in the fourth quarter, he was just basically flat out benched because of the blowout. And also because of the fact that when your team is up 40 to 7 and your lead running back, Brian Robinson, who's been great this year, scoring so many touchdowns, being so efficient for you, and now he's really entering his stride in year 3 in the NFL. Yeah, Brian Robinson, why risk it? Why risk it when he entered the week questionable in a blowout? In general, they're going to pull him, but they're going to be even quicker to pull a guy like Robinson, who's valuable to the team, especially after seeing Jaden Daniels get hurt when the game is 40 to 7. So that kind of explains if we pull up the usage from this game, just 40% of the snaps, yeah, because he was limited by injury in the blowout. 34% of the rush attempts, yeah, because he was limited by injury in the blowout. But the dude in literally the first half of the game had 71 yards and a touchdown. He was going to have a monster day, and the important part here is he looked good, averaging 6 yards per touch. I mean, I could pull up just one play to kind of account for this. You can see Brian Robinson in the backfield next to Jaden Daniels here in the first half. This was one of his explosive runs of 10 plus yards in this game. It's just right up the middle. This is what he does. He finds the lanes in between the tackles. He runs. He picks up about 11 to 12, a 13-yard gain, couple extra yards after contact there. This is something that he's doing. And again, it just seems like a normal carry to all of you watching this, but this is a guy coming off of a multi-week injury. He looked good on that, dragging multiple defenders. Now, in week 7, his quarterback, Jaden Daniels, did get injured. And this is something that is very serious because if Jaden Daniels was to miss extended time, that will halt this offense from sustaining drives and finding the red zone and the end zone. Now, the most recent news we have, or at least the most recent news that we're getting, is that Jaden Daniels had x-rays on his ribs and they ended up being negative, which is good. His mom said that he's fine. If we look at the most updated news from, which you can see here from, let's see, Underdog, you can pull it up, and Jaden Daniels is now considered week to week. That's not great. He's probably missing 1 to 2 weeks overall, but just like the other players that we've talked about here in terms of Rico Gathers and some other players, you're trading for Brian Robinson not for week 8. You're trading for him for weeks 10 through 16 when Jaden Daniels is expected to be back. Because in these upcoming games, the schedule is not good. The matchup against the Bears is not good. Then you have a fine matchup against the Giants. The matchup against the Steelers is not good. But if we pull it to the reasons why we really want to be targeting him here, it's the fantasy postseason. We're in the fantasy postseason. Who does he get? A bottom 10 defense in the Eagles at home, a Falcons bottom 10 run defense, and the Saints, who currently, as of today, allow the most rushing yards per play and struggle to tackle. Overall, this is a great playoff schedule. Going into the playoffs, a nice matchup against the Cowboys and Eagles as well. I think the schedule for Brian Robinson, when he gets Jaden Daniels back entering the postseason and in the fantasy postseason, is why you want to trade for him. And I also think Jordan Mason's like a sneaky buy low candidate right now, which nobody's going to agree with, and that's fine because that means you could buy him super low in my opinion. Now, he entered week 7 after getting banged up in week 6 Thursday Night Football, basically not playing the second half. He entered week 7 on the injury report. But the nice thing about this shoulder injury was right here. He practiced limited on Wednesday, limited on Thursday, full participant on Friday, and this dash right here means that he did not have an injury designation. He wasn't questionable like one of his teammates. He was not on the injury report, which that tells me and tells us, and I put out a Twitter thread about this, that he was going to be a full go. He was good to go, but a lot of people were concerned about this shoulder injury. It's going to limit him. No, the injury report said he didn't have an injury going into the game. He was fine, which reading between the lines can always be very important for those injury reports, so make sure to be following me on Instagram and Twitter where I post them every single week. And just like the injury report suggested, Jordan Mason went back to his full-time role, a season high 86% of the snaps, 74% of the rush attempts for the team in this game, but when you look at just the running back carries, he saw 14 out of 15 running back carries, also a season high over 90%. Now this overall filtered into a not so great game. You can see here just 8.9 fantasy points for fantasy, but 16 touches for 69 yards. It's a fine performance. If he finds the end zone, nobody's even talking about it being a bad performance. The big thing here was he faced the Kansas City Chiefs, a Kansas City Chiefs defense that on the season right now, according to PFF, ranks top 10 in both tackling and run stop. But now you're in a situation where Jordan Mason Mason hasn't scored 10 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games, and maybe people are like, he's not that great. But that needs a lot more context because Jordan Mason is that great. This past week, it was a fine game coming back from an injury, and again, the toughest matchup he's had all year. A couple of weeks ago, sure, he only gets you 8.8 fantasy points according to Player Profiler, but look at this right here. He goes for 98 total yards, a great performance. Then he gets 82 yards in basically just a quarter and a half of play on Thursday Night Football, 9.2 fantasy points. The dude had over 70 total yards, and it was like the early second quarter. He was going to have a big performance there. He's been good all season long. Now, the elephant in the room is obviously Christian McCaffrey and his Achilles, and we got this recent report that he could return in week 10 following the bye week for the 49ers, which is in week 9. So what do we get from this? Well, we know that if he's returning in week 10, and again, a big thing here is they said he could return. They did not say that Christian McCaffrey will return or that's the plan. He could return in week 10. To me, this just means like 50-50 now if he returns in week 10 or week 11. It really depends on how his recovery goes from this injury. So what we guarantee we get is at least one more week of Jordan Mason starting, where he's going to be a home 6-point favorite against the Cowboys bottom 5 run defense. That feels really good in week 8 for him to have another 15 to 20 plus point fantasy day. And then from there, we just go into the bye in week 9, and there's this situation where, again, it could be Christian McCaffrey returning in week 10. The reason why they can't give us any confidence in this is because this injury that Christian McCaffrey has, an Achilles tendonitis, is very, very finicky. It is not straightforward. It is not just something that has to like heal in terms of a tear or a pull. It is a situation where Christian McCaffrey, where he has to slowly load back that Achilles. And if there's any type of flare up, like it seemed like there was a couple of days before week 1 started, it could be a couple of more weeks to a couple more months before Christian McCaffrey can safely return to football. And even when he is able to return to the 49ers this season, there's absolutely no guarantee that he's going back to 20 plus touch Christian McCaffrey, averaging 5.5 yards per touch. Not at all. There's actually a pretty decent chance if he was to return in week 10 after the bye that he's eased back in for 1 to 2 months until the potential actual NFL playoffs. And Jordan Mason's been good enough that I think he's still going to be highly involved, if not leading this backfield for the first few weeks when McCaffrey is back. And let's also bring up the fact that McCaffrey does have a high re-injury risk. He already re-injured this when he injured it in August, then he re-injured it before week 1 in September. So I think the stock right now on Jordan Mason is completely low, despite having a great week 8 matchup upcoming, and really there's still no certainty on when Christian McCaffrey is going to return and what his role will look like and how serious of a re-injury risk there is, which it's apparently very high based on all the doctors. This is an injury that to return to a contact sport will probably take you closer to 4 to 6 months to feel comfortable, and he's going to try and return in like 2.5 or 3. So Jordan Mason is a buy low for me, and this next rookie running back is somebody that honestly isn't going to cost you much, but before we get there, over 60% of you are not subscribed to this YouTube channel. It's that point in the video, the gentleman's agreement. We shake on it. If you made it this far, you find the videos entertaining, helpful, helping you win your league, interesting, whatever it might be. And all I ask in return is that you hit the subscribe button. These videos take me 6 to 8 hours to recreate, from research, editing, recording, and getting them up for you. So all you have to do in return, and it goes a really long way, everybody out there, is hit the subscribe button. Appreciate that a ton. Now, that rookie I was talking about and alluding to is Tyron Tracy, who actually might be able to pick him up in your fantasy league. He's still available in like 40% of leagues right now, but here's the deal with Tyron Tracy. This past week, we got news that Devin Singletary was going to return from a groin injury, but we also got news at the exact same time that Tyron Tracy, according to their head coach, will still see significant playing time. And that's exactly what happened in this game. According to Fantasy Life's data right here, Tyron Tracy led the backfield, even with Devin Singletary back, seeing 67% of the snaps. He ran 68% of the routes as well. He was highly involved, not only on the ground, leading the team with 6 carries, but also in the passing game as well, leading the team in routes run and overall third down usage. Here's the routes run just for proof. Tyron Tracy plays 39 snaps to just 12 for Devin Singletary. The routes run, 27 routes run compared to just 6. Routes run, of course, lead to targets. You have to run a route to be targeted. You can see that right here. Tyron Tracy is in green. He's playing all 10 snaps in the 2-minute offense. He's playing by far the most right here, green of the pie chart, half of the third down snaps, majority of the early down, and the short yardage. He's being used as the RB1 in all situations. Now, of course, Devin Singletary is a veteran coming back from an injury. Maybe they were easing him into this game. And there are some reports out there that that is the case, but they also told us before the game at the exact same time that Tyron Tracy is going to still see significant playing time. So I do think they want to give Tyron Tracy a big workload. And when people look at what the box score showed here in a game where the Giants got blown out, couldn't really run the ball, you'll see just 9 total touches for 32 total yards and think like, oh yeah, Devin Singletary came back. It's over for Tyron Tracy. If that's what the league owner in your league thinks, the league manager will go ahead and send a buy low offer for Tracy. Because this is a dude just the past 2 weeks alone as a late round rookie finished in his first ever start with 130 yards and a top 20 running back. Then this past game in week 6 before Devin Singletary returned, 107 total yards, a touchdown in prime time, looked great, was a top 5 running back. Again, this is a late round rookie running back already earning nearly 70% of the snaps when the starter returned. This is not a first or second round pick, a 5th round running back. That's how good this guy is. And the schedule for him after this week's matchup that's tough against the Giants, where he could definitely earn some receptions, the schedule after that opens up. Home matchup against the Commanders is great. On the road against the Panthers, terrible defense, great. The Cowboys, bottom 5 run defense. The Saints, we've already mentioned how bad they are, allowing the most rushing yards per play. The schedule is awesome right now for the Giants running backs, and Tyron Tracy is the one you want to be buying low on. And you also want to be buying low on, and I'll say it every single week until he returns, on Isaiah Pacheco, because yet again, another week goes by, and Isaiah Pacheco is still somebody you can get for super cheap. Because look, I get it. Kareem Hunt's out there right now for the Kansas City Chiefs, and Kareem Hunt is somebody who's scoring multiple touchdowns now in multiple games with them. He came out of the bye week. He puts up 22 fantasy points. I get it. He's scoring 2 touchdowns in this game. He's surviving on touchdowns, but overall, 24 touches is great. 22 carries for 78 yards. The dude's averaging 3.5 yards per carry. He is not looking good out there in general in terms of like actually running the ball. Like there's nothing stopping him. The second he gets a 14, 15 carry game, he's going to do nothing for you. Meanwhile, we're getting closer to the Isaiah Pacheco return. That SportsMD analysis on Twitter basically says that yes, he's going to be leaning towards a return in week 9 or week 10. That's just weeks away. He does go on to add skill players typically see production hit until the following season coming off of this injury. But again, that's something that's a little bit skewed. Are those older players? Was their backfield having a little bit more competition? Were they attached to Patrick Mahomes in that offense? Probably not. Although I will admit that the Patrick Mahomes offense is not as dynamic this year. It's still one that does move the ball downfield and does enough to be 6-0 on the season. And just a reminder, in week 1, this won't be the same usage now that Kareem Hunt is there and Pacheco's coming off of an injury, but 80% of the snaps, 79% of the carries, 71% of the routes run. The plan was always to have Isaiah Pacheco in all meaningful situations. They trust him on third down and pass protection to catch passes, early downs, red zone. Once he's back, give him a couple weeks to ramp up. Your fantasy postseason, importantly, is what this is for. That's when I think Isaiah Pacheco is valuable, and you can probably get him for nothing right now. So these have been the running backs that you should be trading for before week 8 begins. When the wide receiver video is out later this week, Thursday morning, I'll put it right here. But until then, the running back waivers, the wide receiver waivers, make sure none of those guys are still available on your roster or on your waiver wire. I think a couple of them probably are. But until the next video, where I'll see you then, I'll see you in the next one.